Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, senior editor at Forbes. We have a lot of headlines to get to today, starting with the Republican reconciliation bill is in Senate hands, and it includes major cuts for Medicaid and other social safety net programs. Speaking of cuts, over at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health have already seen thousands of grants slashed this year and faces further cuts in 2026. And meanwhile, over in Los Angeles, the city has been rocked by protests against ICE raids. Joining us to talk about it all is Senator Andy Kim, the freshman senator from New Jersey. Senator, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Maggie.
Let's start with that Senate bill, the budget bill in reconciliation. There are a lot of people who are upset about the cuts to Medicaid and other social safety net programs. What are you hearing?
Well, I'm hearing outrage in New Jersey for this because, first of all, 2 million out of 9 million New Jerseyans get their health care through Medicaid, including people on disabilities, including seniors that require long-term care. 1 out of every 3 kids in my state is on Medicaid. And it's not just the Medicaid population that is at risk. I talked to hospital leaders in New Jersey, and they're saying that if there are major cuts to Medicaid, that their hospitals could very well close, full on close, which would affect everybody. So I just hope that people understand it's not just about whether you're on Medicaid or not. This is something that would be the single largest cut to our healthcare in our nation's history. And to ask yourself, why is this happening? It's not to bring down the deficit. In fact, it's going to balloon the deficit because they want to give trillions of dollars tax cuts to billionaires and millionaires. That's the problem that we face right now, and people are outraged by this right now.
Single largest cut to healthcare. What can Democrats do about this? What are you and your colleagues discussing at the moment?
Well, right now, for instance, in New Jersey, I am trying to raise as much public awareness about this, especially in the 3 congressional districts in New Jersey that are represented by Republicans in the House of Representatives. Because even if this passes in the Senate, it's going to go back to the House of Representatives, and these 3 members from New Jersey are going to have to answer to the people of New Jersey for this. I think about it because I am somebody that challenged a Republican congressman about his vote in a reconciliation bill that he took in 2017 to try to gut the Affordable Care Act. This was a deep Republican congressional district, and I flipped this seat. And we see how potent this can be because people are so worried about their livelihood right now, their health, especially at a time of even greater concern about high prices than what we saw even just a few years ago. So that's how we go on offense, is put that pressure on. I am engaging with several of my Republican colleagues in the Senate because the concerns that I hear from hospitals and healthcare workers and patients in New Jersey, I'll be honest with you, they are going to be hearing the exact same thing from their states. These cuts are not just blue states, it's going to be red states too. Everyone's going to be affected in this country.
You mentioned raising awareness. Are there legislative maneuvers or deals that can be struck that you see possible right now?
Well, look, right now the Republicans control, 53 seats in the Senate. They only need 51 to pass this through the Senate because reconciliation is not something that can be filibustered. So, right now the pressure is to be able to, first of all, have the public be aware of and understand what's at stake, and to be able to then put that pressure down on some of these members of Congress, some of these senators especially from some of these states that are going to be vulnerable in the upcoming election and elsewhere. So that's what we're trying to do. Yes, we are trying to use some of our abilities to add amendments to highlight the dangers of this legislation. So amendments that we're working on that would highlight what these cuts to Medicaid would be, that it would be going after caregivers, for instance. And my father is somebody who is struggling with cognitive decline. He is somebody that requires a caregiver, a medical professional to be helped. Those types of people and families are going to be affected. It's about personalizing this, having people understand this is not just some line item in budget. It isn't about dollar sign. It's about people's lives, about whether or not they and their families are going to be able to get the care that they need.
As you talk about it not being a line item, it's people's lives. I'd love to move to the cuts to NIH. The National Institutes of Health have already faced a slashing of thousands of grants this year and faces further budget cuts in 2026. Can you contextualize exactly what this means for American public health, that the NIH is undergoing what it is undergoing right now?
Yeah, well, let me just contextualize first the budget challenges they face. The Trump proposed budget for next year came out, about $18 billion cut in NIH funding, over a 40% cut from where we're at. Now, this is something that, for instance, we see in there nearly a $3 billion cut for cancer research. That's about a third of the cancer research that our country funds right now. I mean, I don't know about you, but my family's lost loved ones with cancer. I mean, I think every family in America has been touched by this in some way. How in the world is the richest, most powerful country in the world cutting back on our cancer research when this is becoming a greater problem? As I told you, my father is someone who's struggling with dementia, Alzheimer's. That is a lot of families that are struggling right now. Right now, we are trying to lead the charge on finding a cure, finding ways to be able to help treat these problems. This is what we're going to be setting back. And it's not just setting us back a year or two. This is going to be setting us back potentially a decade or two. And that's what I find so ridiculous. And then at the time when my Republican colleagues are talking about concern about global competition, in particular with China, they are the ones that are going to benefit the most. China's going to benefit the most from the United States in decreasing our investment. I already just heard from a top-notch medical researcher who is potentially going to lose their funding in the United States. They have already been contacted by China as well as other nations to move their research abroad. That's what we're going to be finding ourselves. We're going to be finding ourselves as no longer the epicenter, no longer the place that is driving innovation and winning Nobel Prizes and coming up with cures and seeing the benefit to our companies that are manufacturing these cures and the medicine and making tremendous amounts of money injecting into our economy. We would lose that and jeopardize this if this continues.
Now, those are the stakes. Let's talk about the potential outcomes. I spoke with one of your colleagues, Senator Tammy Baldwin, last week, and she indicated some optimism that these cuts will not hold. Do you share that optimism? Do you see a path forward where some of this funding or all of it could be restored?
I struggle to see where all of it could be restored. I'm hoping that we can minimize some of the cuts because some of my colleagues are finding out that their own research institutes and colleges and universities in their states, of which there are many in every single state, that they find themselves very much on the chopping block. So I'm hopeful. I do hope that we can stop it, but I'll be honest, I'm somebody that generally hopes for the best but plans for the worst. I'm somebody that is, my job is to try to make sure that, I am not having oversight over things that we're not anticipating. I need to make sure that we are thinking about what could happen if the worst of this happens. And right now, when I look at what's happened, for instance, my very first job in the federal government was at USAID, about trying to support our federal government and supporting our foreign assistance. We've seen that draw down close to zero in terms of what we can be continuing to do in development assistance. So, I don't think this is a moment where I'm overreacting. I think that there is a lot on the line, and we're seeing very aggressive attacks by this administration on so many important parts of our healthcare infrastructure.
Practically speaking, just quickly, what does that mean to prepare for the worst when it comes to these NIH cuts?
Well, a couple of things. One is that, I want to make sure that we're sounding the alarm with my colleagues here, helping them understand what the true impacts would be if we were to lose this funding. I am also engaged with my state in New Jersey to think through how we can offset some of these cuts that could be devastating to our colleges and our universities. We want to make sure we're not losing, researchers. Want to make sure we're not losing the next generation of young talent coming up. I've also been talking to different companies, whether pharmaceutical companies or other research companies, to try to think through how they might be able to adjust with research and development, R&D, in terms of their own funding. How long can they be able to sort of supplement to be able to offset some of the cuts that are expected? So that's what I'm trying to do is both try to stop these cuts from happening at the federal level, as well as trying to see if there are mitigating plans that we can do at the state, at the local level, with colleges and universities, with the private sector, that can try to make sure we are not just losing and cratering our innovation in this country. So those are some of the things that I'm trying to do from a contingency standpoint.
Now, turning our attention to the protests in LA against the ICE raids, we know that President Trump has sent the Marines to Los Angeles in addition to deploying the National Guard. I want to start by asking, Senator, what is your reaction to this development?
I'm saddened by this. I worked at the Pentagon. I was a civilian embedded with the military in Afghanistan. I worked alongside Marines and other service members to be able to protect our country. I believe so deeply that our military is a sacred trust, and it is supposed to be the beacon that Americans feel safe around, that they feel that the military is there to protect them. And for Trump to move forward and deploy 700 Marines to LA against the orders and the wishes of the governor and local law enforcement for something that we should have been trying to see if there are other means to be able to contain, especially using law enforcement within local law enforcement. To take this kind of measure, it's only going to escalate things. And in particular, it's going to send signals that the military is being used for partisan political purposes, that it's being used for a show. We're thinking about this on the same week that Trump is putting forward a $45 million military parade on his birthday in Washington, D.C. So, of course, is being seen as politicization as well as theatrics when it comes to our military. When that's happening on one side of the country, and on the other side of the country, he's deploying 700 Marines for something that should be done by local law enforcement. So I'm appalled by this. I find it to be a deep overreach of power and abuse of power, and something that's only going to further escalate the problems that are out there as people getting riled up and angry that our military is being abused in this way.
And of course, there have been ICE issues in New Jersey. If mass protests were to come to New Jersey, what could you do? How would you react?
Yeah. When we saw some of the challenges that we faced in New Jersey a couple weeks back with the arrest of the mayor of Newark and some of the aftermath of that, I did, again, in that sort of hope for the best, plan for the worst, I did try to think through what would happen if this got out of control, if there was an escalation by the Trump administration. Because Stephen Miller at the time was talking about what happened in Newark as a rebellion, as an invasion. He's using the same languages that they're using when it comes to LA. This is the language of them trying to set the stage to be able to suspend habeas corpus if they choose to move down that angle. So, what I'm seeing in LA, I think what's important for the American people to understand is that the order that Trump gave activating the National Guard, the military, it doesn't have a geographic containment there. It is anywhere in the country. His order is that he can deploy anywhere in the country, not just LA. And so, we have to be very careful at this moment. What I would say is, look, let's make sure we're shining a light on what's happening, that we're getting as much detail about what is happening to civilians on the ground, trying to make sure we have the right appropriate level of legal representation there for those that need it, that we can have access for journalists to be able to go and be able to tell their story about what they're seeing, as well as, making sure that the public there is safe, that they try not to escalate this, and because that would only give in to Trump. Trump wants people to get riled up. He wants them to get unruly so that he can, further justify what he's trying to do, when he's the one that's inflaming this situation to other levels. And, that's something that needs to be exposed.
Senator Andy Kim from New Jersey, thank you so much for sitting down with Forbes on a very busy news day. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.